Okay.
Yay, live!
And I think we're live, so we'll kick off. Welcome everyone to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor, and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading, all the other things I love. We're here for another genre talk, which is our monthly little segment that I do myself and my good friend Alina, who I'll introduce in a minute. And we're talking about different genres in fiction and also in the sort of broader sense of fiction, including films and TV. And today we're talking about modern classics and literary fiction. But before we kick off, I'll just pass to Alina so she can introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Alina. I'm a fiction writer and I have a YouTube channel, obviously. It's why we do stuff on YouTube. I'm so great at introducing myself right now. I write genre fiction for the most part. A bit of it is LGBT fiction, and by a bit I mean most of it. And yeah, we've been doing this almost all year, and I think today it's going to be mostly you raving about your favorites and me pitching in once in a while. But I think I'm doing a bit better than with classics. I think. I'm not sure. You always put me to shame. Like when I see your lists of all the classics you've read, I'm like, what have I been doing with my life? So I'm expecting that feeling now as well. So yeah, we'll see how this goes.
Well then, we will kick off, and perhaps it's worth saying at this point as well that when we did classics, which was what, 2 months ago, I think, we were sort of saying how everyone's got a different definition of
what's a classic.
Classed as a classic, exactly. And I mean, for me, I tend to have a fairly strict line. I'd call everything up until about 1901, like the death of Queen Victoria, classics. Anything 1901 up until around the 50s, maybe the 60s, would go as modern classics. And after that, I just keep calling it literary fiction. But I know that a lot of people have very different views. And we were discussing how some people are thinking of Harry Potter as a classic, which I absolutely, I'm not saying it's a bad series, but I wouldn't call it a classic. So
no, Lord of the Rings, yes, you can call that a classic.
Yeah, that I put as a modern classic. So yeah, I think it's a very much a personal thing of exactly where we're going to draw the line on these. But essentially, for me, when I'm talking about modern classics today, I'll be talking 1900 to 1950, and then literary fiction onwards. But we'll see. I mean, for me, really, I guess modern classics starts with those sort of Edwardian novels of manners by people like Ian Forster, so like Howard's End and the like, and leads into the sort of Kafka, Camus, and all that sort of postmodern fiction.
Which I kind of read. Yay! Oh my God, I'm not doing
we'll
that
be good on the Kafka.
I keep forgetting we used to do like international literature, universal literature sort of classes, and we had like these huge reading lists, and I always enjoyed those more than the Romanian literature ones, because I was already bored of those. So yeah.
So I guess those are a few opening comments, and then when we talk about literary fiction, I mean, I guess the names that spring to mind, obviously, for me, and we'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, are people like Milan Kundera, Haruki Murakami, Halldór Laxness from Iceland, J.G. Ballard.
I'd say I'd place Kobo Abe there as well for another Japanese author.
Yep.
Yeah, and maybe Nick Hornby, and there was another author, American author, that I say writes literary fiction, and I'm trying to remember his name. I remember a book title, which was Everything is Illuminated, and
okay, that's
there
not
was
one
another
I
one.
know off the top of my head, so it might come to us.
I can Google
it if
because oh, it's a movie too. Yes, Jonathan Safran Foer, actually, that's the one.
Right.
And I guess Zadie Smith as well.
Yes, yeah,
would fall into that. So yeah, that's about it. But I think when it comes to literary fiction, Orhan Pamuk, I'd say.
Yes,
Nobel Prize winner there. I'd say he falls into that as well, and a bit of a historical fiction, but.
Yeah, sometimes there is a bit of a crossover, and you're like, do you call them genre fiction or do you call them literary fiction?
I mean, I think My Name is Red is a combination of so many things. Like you have the mystery aspect and the historical aspect, but I'd still call it kind of literary fiction because of the uniqueness of the book. I don't know.
Yes. Yep.
Although I'd feel good to call it genre fiction too, because then it's like genre fiction finally won a Nobel Award. So.
Very true.
Fine.
So, while we're talking authors, do you want to kick us off and just share a few of your thoughts on books you've enjoyed, things you've read, and then I'll do mine?
Sure. I think I've read more of the French modern classics and a bit of Kafka and things like that, and a lot of Romanian modern classics, which I won't get into because most people don't know anything about them, which is fine. They're great though. Not a lot of them translated as of yet, which is sad, but yeah. I do have favorites when it comes to Romanian literary fiction. I think I'd go with Mircea Cărtărescu, who is still alive and kicking. Great. And I do enjoy Kafka a lot. I didn't think I'd enjoy Kafka. Like when I first started reading it, I was like, "What the hell is this?" And then like halfway through, I was so hooked, and it was so weird. I do love Haruki Murakami a lot, but I think Kobo Abe is a close favorite from Asian literature, and I actually have a great story about Kobo Abe. There's this book by him, I think it's called The Woman in the Dunes or Woman in the Dunes, something like that. And when I was a kid, I was like 11 or 12. I had this huge crush on an older boy, which started a lot of things, including my first standalone novel. Yeah, and he read that book and he was raving about it. So about 2 summers later, he no longer spent his summer in the countryside, so I kind of missed him. So I went and took the book out from the library, and I thought, what the hell is this shit? No, I hate this. Just a bit on the storyline, there was this dude that wakes up in like a huge hole in the sand, and he is paired with a woman that he lives with, and they're supposed to just clean the hole every day because there's sand falling in, and just keep the house together, and if they don't do their work, they don't get water. It's really weird. So of course I was like, no. After I don't know what I was reading then, I think sci-fi mostly, I was like, what is this? I don't want to read it anymore. And then as an adult, I bought it and read it, and I was like, oh yeah, now it makes sense. But maybe you shouldn't read this when you're 12 or 13 and you like all the action adventure stuff. So yeah, that was interesting. And I had a period of reading literary fiction in university and after it.
Right.
But recently, I think I stuck more to nonfiction because I've realized how much I've missed in these genres before Amazon.
Yes.
Because I didn't have easy access to the books, and now I'm kind of catching up on all of those. So classics and literature, literary fiction are the first that are translated, sadly.
Yep.
And then for the genre fiction, what gets here is what's famous in terms of TV and movies.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a lot more limited. So yeah, that's my thing. I think I still have a Haruki Murakami book that I haven't read but I bought, and I think the problem with that is that it's in Romanian, and I've fallen out of the habit of reading in Romanian, and it's a print book.
Right.
And I've fallen out of that habit too. Maybe I think I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder. Actually, no. But sometimes I stop and think like, oh my God, I have so many books, but they're all on my Kindle. And if I want to show them, yeah.
Yeah, I do find that with Instagram. You see people posting all these Instagram pictures, and I'm like, oh, I need to do this challenge, and I need a book that's suitable. And you think, oh, I just don't have one that is like photographable, you know?
I've found my way around that, and I use my tablet, and I
for the cover. Yeah.
And I just place it like artistically and grab a photo, and that's it. I call it a day. Fine. So yeah, let's move on to your favorite.
Okay. I guess if I sort of go through time a little bit, I do enjoy E.M. Forster. And some people find his books a little bit wordy, but I quite like that play of Edwardian manners that goes on in many of his works. And it's quite interesting because there's been quite a few adaptations over the years, and particularly the Merchant Ivory films, of Room with a View and that, which you either love or hate. And I kind of like them, and I can see why people hate them because they're a little problematic at times, but they're still still good fun.
I think I tried to watch that and I fell asleep.
Yep.
That was in a period where, to be fair to the movie, I fell asleep at everything I watched because it was
and then I guess people like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Goldsworthy, who wrote the Forsyte Saga, which if you haven't read that, it's really good. And that also was a very nice adaptation, which I'll talk about more in a minute. Ford Madox Ford. And then moving into the sort of European school as we move forward a few years, people like Kafka and Camus. And then moving on into sort of the realm of modern classics into literary fiction. I'm quite fond of the Hungarian author whose name I will probably mispronounce, so I'm very sorry, everyone who speaks Hungarian, but Sándor Márai. I really like some of his works, and it's actually really hard to find them in English. I've got 2, and I think there's a couple more that are available in English, but some of them are available in German, so I may end up reading them in German instead. And then, as we've already discussed, people like Murakami. I'm very fond of Milan Kundera as well. He's one of those authors who, like Murakami, when you're reading Murakami's work, you're kind of sort of thinking, oh yeah, I really understand that emotion. I think, I felt that way. And Milan Kundera is another one who I think is really good. Like, as you're reading his books, you kind of identify with the characters and you think, oh yeah, I've been there. I've had that experience and that feeling. And I'm also very fond of Halldór Laxness, who's a Icelandic writer, and he's won the Nobel Prize as well for Independent People, which I will probably wave the cover at later and show you. And I really enjoy his stuff. It's very atmospheric. He's got this kind of wry, black sense of humor at times, but you get a really amazing sense of place and you really feel the sort of isolation and the way these people are living. And then moving on a little bit more modern again, I guess, as well, J.G. Ballard, who wrote books like Crash and High Rise. I quite like his kind of dystopian views of the world that come across in a lot of his stories. So, I mean, I guess in terms of adaptations, are there any that you've seen for film or TV that are based on books you'd consider modern classics or lit fic?
I'm trying to think about it. Oh, by the way, I just realized I somehow skipped over one of my all-time favorites.
Oh, yes.
Garcia Marquez.
Oh, yes,
and,
yes.
I mean, I love his books. I have a ton here and a ton more in the other room. And I was like hooked. From the first book I've read, which I think it was, I'm not sure which one was the first. I think it was Love and Other Demons, but I'm not sure. It was surely not the book I was supposed to read, which is 100 Years of Solitude.
Yep.
Because I needed, when we were reading it in school, my best mate started reading it first, and she was laughing her ass off at certain parts of the book, and she was telling me about them because she wanted to share with someone. So I was like, I need to take a break because I kind of know everything that's happened in the book now, and I won't enjoy it as much.
Yeah.
That turned out to be a good choice. But yeah, it was a long love story, and I love that. And then I'm trying to think of adaptations, but I'm drawing a blank.
Well, if I do a few and that might inspire you, you might sort of jog your memory. So, I mean, in terms of going back to the more sort of Edwardian turn of the century era, 20s-ish, you've got like, they did an excellent TV version of the Forsyte Saga over 2 series.
Oh yeah, I've never seen that.
Which was excellent. And I actually hadn't read the book at that point. I read the book after seeing the TV series and loving it. Because Rupert Graves played young Jolyon in that. He was brilliant. And Damian Lewis was Soames. And they also did an excellent adaptation of Ford Madox Ford's Parade's End with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh, yeah. I love that. That was absolutely magnificent.
We won't mention the Merchant Ivories. And I did see a film adaptation. It's the only one I've seen of a Murakami novel of Norwegian Wood, which I quite liked. I took my sister was over in Australia visiting at the time, and she came as well. And she kind of left the cinema and was like, "What the hell was that about?" And I mean, she hasn't read the books, and it was a very slow film. But I think it kind of reflected. Yeah, it's a fairly introspective of all the works. I mean, there's a bit of introspection in all his books, but that one particularly is quite introspective, and the film reflected that. And I thought it was quite a nice adaptation, but it wasn't quite enough happening for her. She kind of came out and was like, what was the point of all that? What I find interesting is J.G. Ballard, there's been a few adaptations. Crash, I think, was very well done with James Spader. That really worked well. And more recently, they did High Rise, and I was really looking forward to it. And it did have an amazing cast. I mean, Tom Hiddleston was in it, Jeremy Irons and Luke Evans. So it was a really high quality cast. And I think it kind of worked and it kind of didn't. I mean, my husband hadn't read the book and he came with me. And we kind of sat in there and we came out and he was like, he didn't understand what was going on. And I think the problem was they kind of missed the middle of the book out. They started really slowly and introduced things, but in the book it tends to be quite a slow degradation from things being perfect in the high rise to things gradually going wrong and then becoming absolute anarchy. And in the film, the absolute anarchy kind of happened very suddenly, and they kind of missed all that middle section building up to it. So you did kind of go, I knew what was happening because I'd read the book. But I think if you hadn't read the book, you were a bit like, not quite sure what's gone on there. So I think it worked in some ways, but I don't think they quite got the pacing right. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty the most recent one I've seen. And I'd love to see some adaptations of how Laxness works, actually, because I think you could do some really atmospheric cinematography with those sort of Icelandic landscapes and like this isolation. Okay. So filmmakers out there, do Outdoor Laxness.
I think I've seen High Rise, but I might be wrong. I remember it quite well, but it might be that I just watched the trailers over and over.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing because that means I'm going to watch it again. But I think I did. I think I went into a Tom Hiddleston period and only watched movies with him.
Yes.
For a bit. I think I did that. I might have. I'm not sure. I have to check. But yeah, I think that was what happened because it's so familiar, but also kind of fuzzy, so it might be that I couldn't get the movie when I wanted it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'll just watch it again and tell you if I knew everything that was.
Yes.
I did not know it was a book adaptation though, because why?
Right. Now, he's written quite a few books, J.G. Ballard. The only ones I've actually read so far are Crash and High Rise, and I would like to read some of the others. There's quite a few others that he's done. And actually, I haven't quite finished. I've got a few left. I've been trying to go through all the Murakami and all the Kundera and all the Laxness that's currently translated. And I've still got just a handful, like 2 or 3 left from most of them to get through to catch up. Well, actually, Murakami released a new one recently, so that's got to add to the list too. Yeah, I mean, Outdoor Laxness has written masses, but very little is in English so far. I think there's maybe 8 to 10 books in English. So I've got most of them. I think I've got another 2 or 3 to get. And then I've just got to work on my Icelandic. So it's at a good enough level that I can finally read the rest, which will be a little while yet. But
I'm like, I have a lot of them in our library because they did publish a lot of them. And I would like to read them, but I don't feel the need to read them in Romanian, especially if they were originally written in English. I just don't want to do that. So yeah, I think that's the idea. And I would not ever in my life buy a recent translation. Like if they translate the new Murakami book, I'm not touching it because recent time translations, and by that I mean everything in the last 10 to 15 years has been super crappy. Super crappy. Like there was the Bastard of Istanbul, which is kind of literary fiction as well. Actually, decidedly, I can't remember the name of the author. But anyway, the thing is, they translated it from English into Romanian, not from Turkish.
Right.
I don't know why. I really don't understand why. And they kept the plurals from English, then added the Romanian plural. So there was an S there that did not belong for every plural
Right.
of a Turkish word. So some words were not translated; they were left in Turkish. So those
Right.
had an S from English, and then the plural from Romanian. Because that makes total sense.
Oh dear.
It was hi there, thanks for joining us, and stick around if the conversation catches your ear.
That was fine. That was fine.
I'm saying words. It's fine. I'm still kind of knackered. It's fine. I did sleep a lot, but I'm still kind of fuzzy. At a certain point, I have to stop and go like, "What if that makes any sense to anyone except me?"
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm good. So yeah, that's but that's super awesome that he's still publishing. I want to add that. So yeah, I think my solution to read more classics of any kind is to get them in English and on my Kindle, because print books put me off, and you can hate me for that.
So I guess, I mean, we've talked a bit about favorites, and we were saying earlier, sometimes it's hard to decide what we're going to call modern classics, what we're going to call classics. And I think in some ways, literary fiction, as we've kind of briefly touched on, is one of those categories as well, where people don't always know what to put in it. So perhaps, do you want to share, Alina, like maybe a few of your thoughts on what you think would make you call a book literary fiction over a genre?
I think it's like, if it doesn't meet the requirements of any of the genres, it might have elements of the genres, but it doesn't follow the trope.
Yeah.
To the letter. I don't know how else to describe it. Sometimes it's the kind of literature that you write that doesn't fit anywhere. I feel that that's the case for now.
Yeah.
Because if I think of Murakami specifically, some of his books could fit in a bit of fantasy or paranormal or stuff like that, but they're not that. So yeah, maybe that unique blend of things that doesn't really fit in a genre, in a specific genre. Like, I'm not talking about books that would fit in several genres.
Yes.
But
yeah.
Stick to one as a primary. I mean, a book that would not work as a particular genre. That's what I call literary fiction. I don't call literary fiction all the pretentious stuff that doesn't want to be.
Yes, yeah. I guess what you touched on briefly there as well is sometimes it's interesting to see where we're going to put magical realism, because in some ways I'd call some of Murakami's magical realism. So there's sort of this hint of fantasy about it, and yet essentially it's the real world, like as we know it.
Yeah.
Things like The Night Circus. I mean, The Night Circus, I think, edged a little bit more towards fantasy. Yeah. But things like Water for Elephants as well. Yeah. I think all of those, you've got what seems to be a sort of contemporary or near contemporary story, but with these strange happenings that don't seem to obey the natural laws as we know them. And I think, Milan Kundera, I would say, does that a little bit as well. It's essentially a story about people and about emotions and identity and who you are and how do you understand yourself and the world around you. But there's often this sort of little hint of something else going on in the background as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of Kafka.
Absolutely.
Magical realism book. I mean, if you think of Metamorphosis, he's pretty much a bug. So yes, it's a metaphor. We get it, but if you take it literally, you could like put it into this. So it's, I think, from a point on, it depends a lot on how the author or publisher categorizes the book. That's about it.
Yeah, and I guess it depends, as you say, what audience they're trying to reach. Like if they think the book's going to do better with a sort of fantasy reader audience, paranormal reader audience, then they'll push it more that way.
I mean, I think if you're someone like Haruki Murakami, you can call your books literary fiction, and everybody will buy them.
Yeah.
You're established within that sort of side of the literature world. But I think for newer writers, if they go straight to literary fiction, I think it's harder to sell those books.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you haven't got that established name, it's easier to try and find a niche where you've got a selective audience than just try and go straight out there.
I feel it's one of those genres where it would be very hard to set a good thing up and do your marketing properly if you want to sell author, because it's harder to narrow down your exact audience. I don't think there's a strictly literary fiction audience that's very large anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think traditional publishing is the way to go for that. Not always. There are exceptions, of course, but yeah, I feel like that sort of book needs a very different approach in marketing and promotion. And I think, again, literary fiction rely more on reviews that are not from amateurs, like professional reviews of the book.
Yeah.
That's at least how I see it. Thinking from the perspective of an author managing their career, not from the perspective of the reader, because I don't care if the book sounds interesting, I'm going to grab it and read it. But I'm not a typical reader, I guess, and neither are you, I think, because we do tend to read across all genres with no problem. And I feel like the majority of readers have a preference for certain genres, and they stick to those.
Yeah. And I was interested you mentioned pretentious writers, because one book we haven't mentioned that we probably should mention if we're going to talk about modern classics is James Joyce's Ulysses.
Oh, God.
I don't think we can really go through a discussion of modern classics and not talk about this book.
Amazing journals.
Yeah.
I enjoyed. I don't think I'd read anything by her. Her journals are okay.
Now, interestingly, this book, I don't like writing in books. The only time, there's only a few times I'll write in books. One of those is if it's in a foreign language and I'm having to look up words as I read, because I do find I'm more likely to recall them when I see them again if I've written the definition next to them once. So I will write in foreign language books for that purpose. And I've also had to write in books sometimes when I've studied it at school. So here is my beautifully annotated copy of Ulysses, which I read in university second year European literature. And we had, I think it was something like 10 books, I think 8 to 10 books on this list. And the way the course worked out, you could afford not to read one of them based on how many you had to write essays on or do an exam on. And nearly the entire class chose the one as the one they wouldn't bother reading as this one. I did read it. The one I actually left was The Trial by Kafka, which, although I like Kafka, that's not one of my favorite Kafka works. And that's the one I didn't write on, in case you were interested. But I did write on Ulysses. I did my essay on Ulysses and I got an A. And I think I was the only one who did the essay on Ulysses.
You would have had a guaranteed A just because.
Just for doing it, just for having proven I've read the thing. I actually really enjoy it. And I think it is pretentious in a way, but I think it's so clever that you kind of like let him off for it. I mean, have you read it, Alina?
No, and I have a story as to why.
Okay, I'll.
A universal literature class in high school.
Right.
For the first year and most of the second year, we had this really cool literature teacher that I loved, and she had this amazing way of presenting books to us that made me want to read. Then for a while, I think a semester, she was on leave because of some health issues, something like that. Someone else took her place. It was this very old lady with very weird ideas compared to, at least the way I saw it. And I disliked her. I had this instant dislike. Oh, sorry, that's my alarm. I'm sorry. And I remember her. I have an image of in my head of her talking about Ulysses, and I was like, never going to read this book. And I'll always see you talking about it in my head if I read it. I'm not even joking. And I was so like, oh no. Oh no. And the only reason I read the other books she talked about was because I already read them. So it was fine. Otherwise, I did not have them. Oh my God, everything she talked about just got this icky. And it wasn't because of her age, by the way, because I had older teachers that I absolutely adored. It had not, I don't know, it was a general dislike. And I felt like she lacked that spark of making us enjoy books. And I think that's like her the most. Like, the first time I heard her talk about the book, I was like, who are you and why are you here? I don't teach this subject. No. So yeah, that's my story with Ulysses.
It is a very clever book, because obviously, as you know, it does retell the Ulysses story, the Odyssey, but it's also written so that as the book progresses, it changes literary style through the ages. So it starts off sounding like this sort of Anglo-Saxon chronicle, goes through like up to sports reporting, and it's incredibly clever. And yes, it is pretentious, but it's so clever that I kind of don't mind him getting away with it. And I did love it. So yeah, I'm one of the few people in the world that would actually willingly sit and reread James Joyce's Ulysses. It's actually one of my favourites of his works, because I'm not a huge fan of Finnegan's Wake and the Dubliners. I do like Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which of course has a shared character with Ulysses in Stephen Dedalus.
I haven't read it.
It's a lot shorter. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is kind of like this thick, you know. So it's a lot nicer. It's about the quarter of the length of this. So it's a bit more approachable.
I might read it just because you love it.
Yeah, it's good. I enjoy it. And Stephen Dedalus is a character from Ulysses, but it's kind of a bit more of his story. It goes into Portrait of the Artist. So we've done our duty. Ulysses has been duly discussed and mentioned. So I think on that note, we've kind of discussed a bit about the style of the writing then and what we think makes literary fiction. And what I find interesting about literary fiction as well is you can't really call things on the covers and things as much, I don't think, as you can with genre fiction.
I think you can catch or capture the atmosphere.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I've got
next to me, but you know, I'm going to grab a few that are not that
big. While Alina's gone, I'm just going to plug Ulysses again. Everyone, read Ulysses. Yay, Ulysses. Don't look at this. It's off-putting. I know, too many pages, aren't there? Too many pages. But stick with it. It's really good. And there's a really brilliant guide called the Bloomsday Book, I think it's called. And it's kind of like almost crib notes for Ulysses. And it's worth, if you're a little bit worried about understanding what's going on in Ulysses, get the Bloomsday Book as well, because that is really excellent resource for just explaining what's going on, where the references are coming from, and in particular how it links to the Ulysses story and which chapters in James Joyce's Ulysses relate to which parts of Ulysses' adventures in the original story. So do check that out as well. It's okay, I'm just encouraging everyone to read Ulysses again for a few minutes while you were gone.
I thought I'd bring in the Dubliners.
Ah yes, Dubliners, yep.
I might read it just because it's so short. And this is, no, I'm not reading it. Like, this is the font. But yeah, I mean, in terms of covers, I think you can always pick what's literary fiction, because you don't equate it with the style of covers for one of the genres.
but it does tend to vary a little bit. I mean, I've got Murakami one here, collection of short stories by him, and I've got a whole selection of these books, and this is the typical look that vintage give his books. They're usually fairly minimalistic. What have you got there, Alina?
I'm trying to think how it determine what the original title. I'm not sure they have it in Japanese. Thank you.
Show me again. Maybe I can work it out.
End of the world and the harsh land of miracles. I don't know.
Okay, I think that's one of the ones I haven't read yet.
Title in the tradition of Japanese titles that you spent 2 days writing. Okay, it's called Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
They reordered the title, and that's why I didn't think of that one. So yeah, it's very atmospheric, and I've got some Jonathan Safran forwards here, and this is what the stuff to go with. And the Bastards of Istanbul. The writer is Elif Shafak. So this is, of course, they're atmospheric, and of course, all the flowery parts of.
Oh yes, Zadie Smith, white teeth, similar, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, for like modern classics, I feel like they like going with painting.
Yes, definitely. I mean, my Ulysses. Here, everyone, have a plug for Ulysses again. It's very sort of abstract kind of artwork going on there. I'm not quite sure why exactly. I'm not actually sure what that has to do with Ulysses, but who knows. Milan Kundera, the Fabers for Milan editions of Milan Kundera are all kind of almost like a kid's sketchbook. Most of them do in that series. And Haldor Laxness, I've actually got editions from 2 different styles for these. Some of them have got some really hideously ugly artwork on, sort of paintings and that, as you say. And the other sort of side of the collection, which I like a lot more, tends to be sort of an atmospheric photograph. We can see some hot springs in Iceland bubbling forth their sulfur and various things going on there. So,
and for this one, like you get a little darker and you get horror.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So, or you get like darker but noir vibe like this, and you get thrillers and mysteries. So they're distinctive, but they still borrow elements from different genres.
And I do think as well, I mean, I seem to notice with literary fiction, the author is sometimes more important quite often than the title. I think more than in genre fiction. Genre fiction does it a little bit with really famous authors, but in literary fiction, the name tends to be the prominent. Yeah, as you say there, the Zadie Smith. Definitely.
For these ones,
it's about the same. Yeah.
I mean, the font is larger for
the name. Yeah. Yeah.
So, by the this is extremely loud and incredibly close. I think that's the title in English. This was a brilliant book. I completely adore this. I recommend this to everyone. It's written from the perspective of a kid. I think he's 9 or something.
Okay.
His father died in 9/11.
Right.
And it's brilliant. It's great. The perspective of the kid is so impressive. Because I find writing kids in a believable way and keeping it engaging is extremely difficult.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, back to covers. I kind of find it mesmerizing in a way how distinct they are while borrowing elements from other genres. It's fascinating, I think, because the flowery stuff, you see those in YA contemporaries and YA thrillers, things like that. Some of the painterly style, especially when you get more sketchy and cartoony, you see those in cozies. It's really interesting. like they have this connection with certain genres, but then they're distinct. And I find that fascinating. Of course, if you use this kind of cover, try to write genre fiction, it probably fails. Which is weird, but it works well for literary fictions and modern classics, I think.
Yeah, and I think where we're talking about the author name prominence as well, I mean, I guess obviously people do have certain authors in genres where they'll just buy a new book by the author regardless. But I think in literary fiction, it's probably slightly different. I mean, if I say I love paranormal romance and I see a book by an author I don't know, but it looks like a typical paranormal romance that I'd enjoy, I'm probably more likely to take a chance on it than if I was looking at literary fiction and it was an author I didn't know. I think you buy for the author much more in literary fiction, whereas in genre fiction you buy for the series or the story a little bit more. Whereas if a new Murakami comes out, I don't even read what the story's about. I'm just like, oh, a new Murakami, I better add it to the wish list. Yeah, it's about the author.
I think there are some genres where the author name is kind of on the same level with the title as prominence and like font choice. I think some thrillers are like that because you do kind of tend to pick an author that you enjoy.
Yeah, something like James Patterson or a big name. Yeah.
But it's not that often. It's not that often. I think they're more geared towards consistency, like having the same font for the author names throughout the books, which is okay. And the thing with modern classics is I think they stick, like in this edition, they stick with a certain font choice for title and author, regardless of the title and author.
Yes, it's just for the edition, like the words. That's a Wordsworth, is it there?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a Wordsworth. Yeah.
I mean, I get why it happens, but I think that's a bigger chance for the cover to say nothing about the book, and especially not.
In some ways, I think with the classics, they're almost selling their publishing house as much as anything, because all the classics, like as soon as you held that up, I knew that was a Wordsworth, just from the style of the book. And Penguin had their distinct style, and they started going in for the colours, like just the bright orange or the black cover. And the same Oxford Classics. You always know the Oxford Classics. It's got that cream with a bit of red for the name, and so they're almost selling their brand and saying we're the best publishing house for good quality classics and translations of classics and things like that, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm not sure if my comment is in French or not. Anyway, I'll check, and if it is, I'll amend my thoughts on the next stream. It does vary a bit from country to country.
Yeah.
Not a lot. I mean, it depends on the country. If you're a smaller country and they do a translation for you, they'll keep the cover and just readjust it because there's no point investing in a new cover. What I think they did with the Romanian version. I have to search, but I'm pretty sure they didn't change this at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they only change covers for certain markets. Like I've noticed that usually the British and UK covers are different, and they kind of go with a different cover feel for Germany as well.
Right.
Which is interesting to me, and I think it bears mentioning for people who think of translating their books and not do it to a publisher. You should really look into the local covers.
Yes.
Romance, for example, it's very different.
Okay.
How they cover in German translations.
Right.
For that. So yeah, that's something we should note at some point before we finish our series.
So we've talked about covers. We've talked about our favourites. Now, I think everyone knows who's watching us if they're familiar with our works, and neither of us has written the next literary fiction masterpiece yet. So, do you see yourself penning a literary fiction masterpiece, Alina?
No, I think it has. I mean, I think if I go with literary fiction, it would go so dark, so dark. and I'm afraid I'm going to do it in the style that people have done, the equivalent of literary fiction in film about Romania. I mean, you have two choices. You either go comedic or you go really dark, and you talk about communism and how awful everything is, or post-communism and how awful everything is. Jesus Christ. I mean, there's a Romanian movie. I mean, it's 3 hours of film, by the way. And it's just people at the table eating. It's not any meal. It's the sort of meal after a funeral.
Right.
To get along and people talk shit. But the movie is like 3 hours and a half. And could have been cut down to like an hour and a half. And I know I'll never see that. I mean, that's like the pretentious standard of movies, and I feel like literary fiction would be the same way, unless it's Mircea Căsărescu, which again, I'd like to touch upon this. It's also something that could be considered magical realism. Now that we talk about it, although it has like some fantastic elements that mostly have to do with the past, and I mean, the further in the past they are, the more fantastical the elements are.
Right.
There's a scene at some point where some people travel from a village that they left because something bad happened, like demons and angels fighting. And then they're walking and they find this frozen river and they're starving, but there are these huge butterflies that are frozen in the river, and then they cut pieces of the huge butterflies and eat them. It's really weird. So the closer it is to the present, there are some magical touches, but they're more constrained. I don't know. They're kind of like not as fantastical, because the closer you are to the present, the more skeptical you become. I don't know. It's very weird. It's a 3-part series. It has 3 volumes, and I'm really upset that they only translated the first one. And I think that's so not
yeah.
Translated in a lot of languages, but they didn't translate the second and third.
Yeah, it seems a bit stupid not to finish the story when you've started. Yeah.
It's built as a butterfly. So the first one is the left wing, the second one is the body, and the third one is the right wing. It's a very interesting book, and it touches on communism and everything that was going on at that point. Because the author himself was almost thrown in jail because he wasn't working. Because, he wasn't writing. But you couldn't be at home and write, because that meant you were not employed, and job was illegal, by the way, which is crazy. So you either create a masterpiece like that, or you go comedic, or you go like pretentious dark or pretentious funny, and I do not want to do that. So probably not going to write literary fiction, but let's face it, I didn't think I'd write mystery or coded, and I'm working on both of those things right now. So never say never, but no, unlikely. What about you?
I would say I probably won't, but I would really like to. There's part of me that thinks I'd really like to write, an awesome literary masterpiece. But I mean, I do tend to be drawn lately to the more paranormal style plots. And I think I'd worry writing literary fiction about finding a home for it, because as you're saying, you kind of do have to go with one of the big traditional publishers generally to get anywhere with literary fiction. So I kind of like the idea that one day I'll write the next great English-Australian novel. But I don't see it happening anytime soon. And I think you'd need the right idea. And you'd have to, maybe one day it will come to you, and that perfect idea that will absolutely work, and then you could do it. But I don't think it's something you can really sit down and brainstorm. I think it'd have to be just pure inspiration for me.
I think I might maybe be drawn to something that's sort of like magical realism.
Yes. Yeah.
I have an issue with that. I mean, if you're talking about magic and you want me to believe this is the real world, I can't. It does not work. It's weird. I can read the most fantastical things and paranormal stuff, and that's believable to me. I I can suspend my disbelief. But if you give me magical realism, I'm like, no. Prayer circles for sending healing vibes to someone living in the present with science and stuff does not work for me. And I've tried it with authors that I really love, and it doesn't click well with me. So it would be interesting to explore, but unless I could say in the end it wasn't magic, I'm not touching it.
Yeah.
Not. It puts me off. It's weird.
Have you read or seen the film of Big Fish?
I don't think so.
Ewan McGregor, because that's talking about your idea of whether you're saying it's going to be real magic or not at the end. It kind of ties in with that, because I won't spoiler it in case you see it, but it really is a magical realism story, and the guy, the main character, who's played as his younger self by Ewan McGregor, he's lived this amazing life and done all these like bizarre, like fantastical things and met all these strange people. And he's been telling his family and his son these stories ever since the son was young. And the son's he believed them as a child, but as an adult, he's like, oh, he's just like making up rubbish. And as the father, played by Albert Finney, as an older man, becomes ill and is potentially gonna die, the son starts to question what's real and what's not, and you're kind of left at the end of that film almost with an option of how much you want to believe was real, or whether you decide there is like a realistic explanation for it and he just like made it a little bit fantastical in his telling, or whether there were elements of truth in it. So that kind of relates to your idea of you're going to tell us if it's actually magic or not. I think that kind of it kind of says at the end of the story it can go either way, and you can believe whichever one you want to.
I think that's exactly what I did in Craving Stains. Yes. At the end of the book, you either believe that the character had some mental issues, and that's it, or you believe in the paranormal stuff. Yeah, it's a bit of a choice, but I mean.
But if you get a chance to watch it, watch Big Fish, because it's fun.
Yeah, I should watch it, because that sounds right up my alley, and I will definitely believe it had an explanation. I don't know why my brain works like that. Like I don't know. I don't understand. I think I just need to separate what's real contemporary stuff and what's fantasy or paranormal. When you blend them and you want me to believe this is real in the real world, doesn't really work. Yeah. Unless it's supernatural, then I believe it.
One author I quite like at the moment, who she's a little bit, I would sort of say maybe you'd call her literary fiction, but she's one of those, as we were saying, who kind of could sit in genres as well. And her name's Hannah Kent. She's actually from here in Adelaide. She's an Australian author. And she's written 2 books so far. The first was called Burial Rites, which was, in some ways, you can call it a historical novel, because it's about the last woman who was hanged in Iceland, which was true. It's based on a true story, but a fictional telling of what happened. And there is a sort of, it's not quite magical realism, that one, but there is this sort of hint of something else in the background there. And that one really straddles the border between calling it historical fiction and literary fiction. And then she did more recently The Good People, which again, it's going back in time a little bit, so it's semi-historical. And it also involves the idea, again, based on a true story, something she read in an old newspaper about a woman who was accused of killing her child. And when asked what she was doing, like why she'd done this, she said it wasn't her child, it was a changeling left by the fairies. So there's, again, that, as we were just saying about that other book, there's this sort of idea of it's possible that this was true and that there was magical goings on, or she just had some sort of mental problem and killed her child because of it, kind of thing. So that's it. I find her work quite interesting. She could call it historical, you could call that a bit fantasy, magical realism, but you could also take them as literary fiction as well. But she's a very, very good author.
Yeah, you should link me at some point.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, my wish list is not huge enough. My wish list, by the way, is built of books and art supplies at this point on Amazon. Yeah. It's insane. It's just insane. So, yeah, I'm trying really hard not to add a lot of things to it, but I find it easy to then remember what books I want.
Yes. I mean, I've got an Amazon wishlist that I just use for DVDs, just to keep note of what DVDs I want. Because I don't really buy books from Amazon. I buy books from Book Depository because of the free postage to Australia in particular now. So I have my book one that's ongoing on Book Depository that my husband and my mother and everyone in the family knows the link to it, so that when birthdays and Christmas come, they can just look and they know that they're getting something I want and I haven't already got. And I think I've got 240 or 250 or something on that at the moment. And that can be really hard. Like, it does get out of control because you think, oh, that looks interesting, that book, I'll add it to the wish list. But then nothing gets bought and it's all just on there forever. Every now and again, I do have a little clear through and say, do I really want this one, like, desperately? And if not, I'll take it off.
No, I know. I've done that because I've realized I've added some books in the past that I wanted to read back then. But since then, in particular genres, my taste kind of changed. And I don't necessarily want to read them anymore. So that's why
sometimes I do find a new author and I read one of their books and I'm just like, oh my God, I've got to read everything they've ever written. So you go on the Book Depository and you start adding it. So, I mean, I've obviously got my few outstanding Murakamis and Kunderas are all on there waiting till eventually I get them and finish them off. And I think I've still got 2 more Hador Latsnes to get. But then I discovered recently another Icelandic author called Sjón. And I've read one work by him called The Blue Fox, which I got for Christmas last year and really enjoyed. So I've added some more of his, and I know my mother's bought me 2 for Christmas and birthday. So
nice.
That's good. I'll read some more of his. But with the Icelandic ones, it's sometimes easier because they haven't translated that many yet. So there's only a few. But I suddenly realized the other day when we were back talking about the classics that there's masses of Alexander Dumas I haven't read yet. So I was like, right, quick on Book Depository, wish list. Everything went on there. I didn't get too carried away because some of those series where he wrote books that kind of in a bit of a series, some of them have got quite a few. And if I put them all on, what my mother tends to do is manage to pick the final one in the series to buy me. Because she doesn't really look at what she's buying. She just goes, oh, yeah, I'll pick that one, and get her those. And so she, without fail, she always manages to pick the one that's like in the middle or at the end of the series. So then it's like, well, I can't read it yet because I need all the others. So I've taken now to only putting the first 1 or 2 that I need to continue the series. And then when I've got those, I'll add the next couple. Then that doesn't happen quite so much.
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
It's a skill. It is a skill, the way she can do it.
I mean, it's easy for me because if anyone buys stuff off my wish list, like close friends or family, it's mostly family and my boyfriend, they ask me what I want. And that's how it goes. So then I have some control. But yeah, if I had a lot of people buying off that list, I'd have to do the same thing. Clearly.
Yeah. My husband and I sat here together because obviously Christmas and my birthday are coming up. So we sat here together a week or so ago, and Corey looked through the list and he picked some up to half the value he was going to spend. And then he's like, and you can pick which one do you want from the rest. So then I just went through myself and picked a few more to add.
That's awesome. That's going to be so fun. Oh, God. Yeah.
Which took us off topic a bit. We're digressing again, people, as we do every week.
Yeah.
But it's still book related. It's still it's
always book related.
It's the same.
Yeah. I was thinking that I haven't gotten a lot of bookish gifts lately because I tend to buy a lot of books and I buy them myself and then that's it. Which doesn't bother me at all because that way I have some control. And what I've got off wish lists were other things like, I don't know, pens and books and stuff like that, which also works because I want them all. By the way, because Christmas is coming and everything, someone posted, The Mind of Watercolor, I think, posted a video about gifts you could buy for an artist. I think a lot of them work for authors as well because there were beautiful fountain pens and whatever. And I was like, I want everything now. I want it all. I need it all. I need it desperately right now. And then I was looking at the prices and I was like, okay, no, I don't need that.
You don't need that Mont Blanc fountain pen at the moment.
I mean, it's not that expensive. He got some really good pens that were like $50 to $60.
Okay.
really good value. And the only thing I want from there, and I will buy sometime at some point from the US store, because I don't think you can find it in the UK, was this beautiful watercolor sketchbook that had cotton paper. And it was like $10 or $15, which is not a lot at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm going to buy of this. But then I was like, I want it all. Those brushes are perfect for me. They cost more than all of my brushes combined. But oh well, it's good. So yeah, gift ideas are very dangerous, very dangerous. But yeah, if you need inspiration for an artist and author, because fountain pens again, it doesn't matter that we type, we still want our fountain pens. It's fine. You should check that. God damn, no, don't. It will destroy you. No, check it. It's okay. If you have more restraint than I do, hi, Edith. He came to say hi. Is this your favorite? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. He decided this is his because it was the first one I showed him. So. Okay, back to the literary fiction. Do you think at some point, regardless of genre, because when you talk about modern classics, actually true classics, it doesn't matter anymore what genre they was in, because again, Tolkien. Do you think your books will become classics in the future? Like 50 years from now, people will be studying them in literature classes and hate us for writing them in the first place.
Oh, well, now you make me want to go off and write a book that's absolutely full of really obscure references that will like just like upset students for decades to come.
Oh my God, yeah.
I do tend to reference stuff a lot in my works, and some of them are a bit more obvious than others. Yeah, I definitely think now I should go off and write that literary fiction masterpiece and make it even more densely populated with literary references and things than Ulysses.
Oh yeah, do that.
In fact, what you missed while you were grabbing your books earlier, Alina, when I was doing my pimping of James Joyce's Ulysses again, was that I said, if you're going to buy Ulysses and read it, then you should probably buy the Bloomsday book as well, which is like the crib note version for Ulysses. Like you get spark notes and crib notes for the Shakespeare and things like that, and Dickens. There is a book, and I'm pretty sure the title was the Bloomsday book, which is going through Ulysses and explaining how each chapter relates to the original story and any other like weird references, because I mean there's masses of Shakespeare references and various things that go on in it. So it kind of like does all the like background on that and what you're actually reading, like what it's actually meant to be about.
Oh, it would be so cool to have that and the book and the original story and just read them all.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the part of the fun for me, why I did enjoy Ulysses, because I did quite like sort of seeing how much I was picking out myself, and if there were references that I wasn't like noticing, and that was quite good fun. I think that made it a bit more entertaining as well, like how much can I spot without it being pointed out in the crib guide, So yes, good old Ulysses.
If you don't know what that is, I mean, I think we could liken that to playing a game and watching walkthroughs.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. They will walk you through the mind of the author, and then author will show up and say, "That's not what I meant to do."
In fact, just to show how much stuff goes on in Ulysses, considering it is a fiction but not a non-fiction, this much is just the appendices and notes.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, that's the actual ratio to the text. Of about a fifth of it. About a fifth of this book is just the notes explaining the book. So
that's great. That is awesome. And then you need another walkthrough type of thing. Yeah, that's so certainly I should read that, because I don't have enough time in my life as it is, so I should embark on that. I probably will, because now you've just made me so curious. But then again, I think I might have Ulysses as well, but if I have it in the same edition, I'm not touching this. This is like 8 or 7 as a font. And no.
That's why they're
Even
making it so much or such a good price for the book. Often the classics are in tiny print, but then they're a bit cheaper, and they just shove it all into as few pages as possible and like make them a bit cheaper.
It's horrible. Like, just no.
And a lot of the classics now, obviously, you can find on Project Gutenberg and that. But I've tried reading a few from there that just aren't available. There's some like the Beulah-Lytton novels and things that I'd like to read, Edward Beulah-Lytton, and they're all on Project Gutenberg. It's often quite hard to find print copies, and when you do, it's one that someone's put together themselves and printed on CreateSpace. You know, it's not like an official copy, which kind of always puts me off a little bit and makes me think, I don't know what it's going to be like quality-wise. But the trouble with reading from the Project Gutenberg is usually the files aren't brilliant. And I mean, maybe I should try the PDFs instead of the EPUBs. But the EPUBs, I noticed the formatting's always off. And you've got stuff appearing in the wrong place, like halfway down the page when it should be at the top. And the formatting's always bizarro. And it's like, well, they're free, but they're also kind of unreadable. So maybe I ought to give the PDFs a try instead and just put up with a slightly smaller font and get everything in the right place. But that's digressing again, people, back to the classics, which we did 2 months ago, but never mind.
Yeah, no, I'd like to say something about classics and modern classics, that because of how readers have changed and their perspectives. Like, when you read classics, take them as the book of their period. Don't judge them by modern standards.
Yes.
Or modern morals or whatever you want, because then you'll just miss out on a lot. You can't judge a book written 100 years ago using the rules and morals of current time.
Yeah. And I think it's also linked to that. It's also important to remember that we're reading them and thinking, oh, these are these ancient, you know, old Victorian or before books and things. But of course, when they came out, they were being read by a contemporary audience. Yeah. So as you're saying, like, we don't want to put our own morals. Sometimes to understand them as well, you need to have a bit of an idea of what things were like at the time and where the authors are coming from with some of the characters they present and the scenarios they present, because they're all things that would have been really important to readers at the time, because they would have been contemporary issues. Think about Dickens and all his social issues in Dickens novels, commenting on Victorian poor and things like that, which at the time, obviously, that's stuff that was actually going on. And we look back at it now and it's this sort of old novel and we're like, oh, yeah, well, that's old times. But you know, at the time, it was a major issue in society that he was commenting on.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And again, that's how I look at it. I can't just judge people based on my current
and I mean, that's equally true. That's equally true of modern classics. If you think about an author like Kafka and things that went on, like for him as a Jew, that happened sort of around his period, and things that went on in the Second World War and how that all linked in. So yeah, it's a similar thing there.
Yeah, exactly. And also, just I think it's advisable, if you've only read current times literature, just get a bit of patience, because the style is kind of different.
Yes.
It's a lot more descriptive in a lot of cases, more introspective, and there are things that we would now consider to be info dumps and things like that.
Yes. The point of view in particular as well. Someone like Dickens, third person omniscient, which nowadays would be called head hopping, and we'd be going, no, we can't do that. Totally normal then. So yeah, definitely. And I think in some ways as well, you want to start with for any classics and even some of the modern classics, start small. Like, it's no use going, I'm going to read classics and I'm going to start with War and Peace. You know, and even with someone like Dickens, you don't want to go in and pick something like Bleak House to begin with. You'd pick one of the small ones, like you know, something like Great Expectations, Tale of Two Cities, maybe. So start small. Don't put yourself off by going for one of those big 900-page tomes to begin with. But be a bit realistic and just pick something that's a bit more manageable, just to get used to the style of writing before you really launch yourself at some of those major works. As we were talking about Kafka just now, I'd better do another plug. If anyone goes to Prague, the Kafka Museum in Prague is awesome. So
I've not seen that. I've been there twice and I've not seen that, and I have to.
Yeah, next time you go, it's on the castle side of the river, but down near the river level, so you can kind of nip into it before you come back across the Charles Bridge.
That's awesome. That's my favorite spot in Prague, by the way. I could spend a lot of time on Charles Bridge, and now if I go again, I'll probably get a sketchbook and sketch every little statue. Below them. So,
but it's a very good museum. So it's definitely worth it the next time you're there. And if any other people watching visit Prague, it's definitely worth the time to go in there for a couple of hours.
Yep, that's so true. Okay.
Well, I think that we're pretty much. Yeah, I think we're pretty much. Sorry, I just got distracted looking at the live chat in case there was anything I needed to address over there. Yes, I think we've kind of pretty much covered our topic for the day. I mean, unless you've got anything else you want to speak about in terms of the modern classics and Litvic.
No, I think we've covered it all, but I think we should kind of decide on in the next genre talk, because I think people need to know, because Christmas is coming and I don't want us to be swept up in that, because we're important and our genre talk is important, and we're so important. I forgot what genre we've got left. We
are doing holiday stories, Alina. So just to keep it really topical. This is our last one for the year. It's going to be taking place on, I think it was the 2nd, wasn't it? I'm just going to double check the date.
First week, right? So
yeah, that's it. So Sunday, the 2nd of December will be our last genre talk, at least for the year, and possibly completely. So I think we've kind of covered all the genres. So we'll just have to see if we come up with another idea of things to do.
I was thinking to pitch this idea, and people can weigh in the comments, and you can weigh in live. I was thinking that maybe in January we should do a non-fiction genre talk about it for a bit, what we like to read, what we prefer to read, what we think we might write at some point in the non-fiction world.
That sounds good to me, Alina. Yeah, and if you've got any other topics, as Alina said, if you want to suggest something that you'd like us to discuss, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a genre. I mean, we've talked before about maybe talking about translations, as we've just been discussing them today again. Maybe we'll do a little chat about the idea of translation of fiction at some point. So if there's anything you want to suggest that you want to hear Alina and I discuss and give our views and thoughts on, pop those in the comments for us, and we will keep them in mind as we move into 2019. But yes, as I said, 2nd of December we'll be back again for the last genre talk for 2018. And we're going to be talking about holiday stories, just to keep it really topical and of the moment. And obviously, Alina and I have both done little Christmas short story type releases.
Yes, and
so we'll have a bit to talk about.
This was so well planned, and we had a reason to set it up like that, and I completely forgot what we were supposed to talk about.
And of course, it might be, depending on how long we discuss the books for, we might also share with you a few thoughts on Christmas traditions, because obviously we've got Alina's Romanian traditions, and I lived in England for most of my life and now live in Australia, which is a very different style of Christmas. So we might be able to share a few thoughts on those for you as well.
Yeah.
So we will wrap up there, and we will see you all again in about 4 weeks on the 2nd of December. So bye for now, everyone.
Bye.